Give us a sense of the mood, how that has evolved at Windsor Castle today.
Well, I know you just mentioned that members of the public have been told not to gather, not to bring any flowers. In fact, they were told that the royal family's wishes was that members of the public consider donating to charity instead of bringing flowers. But I have to say, there's been a steady stream of people outside every royal residence. People are defying those wishes, wanting to be there in person. As one person told me, you know, it's a moment in history and there's something very poignant about being there. You know, this is Windsor Castle, but there's not just a castle at Windsor. This is a community. There are people living here. So for those people, there's that physical proximity to the Duke and the Queen, who have also been here for the past year. This is where they spent the lockdown. And of course, this is where he's been for the past 3 weeks after being released from hospital, and where he passed away. It's where he will be buried as well. And I know there are some people perhaps watching from the outside thinking, I can't understand why people are so emotional. Well, there are many reasons. For one, there's a sense of patriotism, that this is ingrained in their culture. I bumped into a woman at 8 o'clock this morning while getting my coffee, and she was walking there with her flowers, saying that the Duke reminded her of her father. So I think it's a generational issue as well. But there have been young people who have brought flowers. One person told me that her grandfather came here in the 1950s. He looked up to the Duke of Edinburgh because he represented service. He was an inspiration to him. He couldn't come, so she came on his behalf. So all kinds of stories, really, but they are not listening to what the royal family is telling them. They are coming in person, and it is the weekend as well. The restrictions will be eased on Monday, so people definitely wanted to be present.
Yeah, certainly. And as you say there, Danielle, in any which way that they can't pay their respects because of that close connection, that generational connection, as you mentioned, to the royal family, to the Duke of Edinburgh himself. We've got information now that I'm going to pass on to you and get your thoughts here as we're getting more information coming in from Buckingham Palace. So we now know that the funeral for Prince Philip will be held on a Saturday, April 17th at this is what Buckingham Palace is telling us. It will be a ceremonial, not a state funeral. No public access or public procession. The funeral service will be in line with national COVID-19 guidelines, of course, so they'll be limiting the numbers to 30 mourners. National minutes of silence will be held at 3 o'clock local time on April 17th. That'll be the start of the funeral service. We also understand now the Queen's grandson, Prince Harry, is planning to attend the funeral. His wife, however, Meghan, on the advice of her physician, will not be attending, so she will not be flying, certainly. And of course, it has been asked, as we've all been asking, Danielle, how the Queen is doing, how she's coping with this. A palace spokesperson says, of course, the family is in mourning. She has approved, the Queen has approved 8 days of national mourning until the funeral, and the royal family themselves will observe 2 weeks of mourning. So I know these conversations you and I have been having, you've been having with my colleagues as well. What more can we find out here? Well, here we go. This seems to be where things are going to be headed, all held on April 17th.
I apologize, Angie. I'm having trouble hearing you, but I'm just going to react to what you just said. We always knew there wasn't going to be a state funeral. Those were Prince Philip's wishes. He didn't want any fuss. He didn't want a big deal being made of his funeral. So perhaps in a way, this is fitting. If it is going to be only 30 people, this is a very small ceremony. I think a lot of people will be relieved to see Prince Harry there. He will, of course, have to quarantine. He will have to leave sometime this weekend to be able to quarantine for about 5 days to make it to this ceremony. It is remarkable that this is such a moment in history, but there will be no crowds as you would expect there to be. I read something yesterday that made me chuckle, to be honest with you, that there have been, you know, he's 99, or he was 99 years old. There have been many scenarios for his funeral, and he ended up outliving many of those who were involved in the planning of his funeral, and that often was amusing to him. But there will be no crowds. You know, we'll see who exactly will be attending this funeral. Forgive me. And 8 days of mourning, that was always the plan pre-pandemic. But again, quite the life when you think about how this all started. This, at the very core of it, is a love story between Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth. And when he, came into the picture, he was not really accepted here. The advisors in the royal household didn't trust him. They didn't like him. He was seen as a foreigner, an outsider. And the public, 40% of people objected and disapproved of his engagement. Fast forward 70 years later, and there's this outpouring of emotion. People truly overcome with emotion because they feel for the Queen, that she is now a widow after all these years, having lost her husband, her partner, her advisor. But she did receive a visit yesterday from Prince Charles. Today, Prince Andrew, as well as Prince Edward, her youngest son, along with his wife, Sophie. And upon their departure, the windows were down in the car, and she was asked how the Queen was doing, and she said she was doing amazingly. She was tearful, but you can imagine there are quite a lot of tears in the family right now. We knew this was going to come, but, Prince Philip had a reputation for always being able to bounce back, for being stoic. But the end, of course, had to come.
Yeah, no, absolutely, as you say there. And, quite a life he had, Danielle. Quite a love story, as you mentioned there, between the two of them. Often when you see the Queen and Prince Philip, and they, always 2 steps behind her, you get that sense of how much respect that he has for her, how much he honored the position that she has, and how well he would connect with people that were there, that would gather to meet them, often having that, humorous nature about him. And now, of course, we've got information here with regards to how he's going to be remembered and how he's going to be honored. And certainly, I think we're going to see a lot more of that over the course of the next few days and few weeks, Danielle, not just where you are in Britain, but of course in Canada as well. Many people here reacting. Thank you so much for